Hello, welcome to the very interesting and exciting session. Today we are going to talk about digital tax, breaking down the digital tax conundrum. Why is it good for innovation? And that's the title of this session. My name is Yumiko Murakami. I'm the head of Tokyo OECD Center, and I am going to be moderating this extremely interesting panel with two, again, very exciting speakers, because they are the ones who know about this topic better than anyone in the world. So let me start off with the first speaker, Pascal Saint-Amans. Can you see us? Yes, I can see you now.
Yes,
Director of OECD Center for Tax Policy and Administration. He is very kind to participate in this discussion from Paris, which is really early in the morning. You can just see it's still kind of dark there. It's 7:30 or something like that in the morning. He has been responsible for all the important developments that have taken place in the digital tax discussion, but not only digital tax discussion, but in general, we have been doing a lot of work around the global tax systems at OECD, and he is the one who makes it happen behind the scene. And also we have today Huey Tern there. Good afternoon. She's in Singapore, so a little bit better in terms of time zone. She's a Deputy Commissioner at the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. She is one of the most active and very also very useful discussants and participants in the discussions that have been taking place at OECD, but also other venues when it comes to discussions around the taxation, especially global taxation issues. So I am sure many of you today watching this session scratching their head and thinking, what is it really? What is digital tax that we are going to talk about? So I'm going to make it very easy for you. I'm going to ask a very simple question to Pascal first. What is digital tax? What is it? Can you make it very easy for me and the audience so that we don't have to scratch my head again? Please, Pascal,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Yumiko, and good to be with you all. It's a very easy answer. Digital tax does not exist for the time being. What do I mean by that? You have corporate income tax. Corporate income tax is the tax on profit paid by companies, including multinational companies, and multinational companies will pay corporate income tax in the countries where they operate. They will have a headquarter in Japan, they will have a center for distribution in Singapore, they will have activities in China, and they will pay taxes in Japan, in Singapore, and in China. The difficulty with digital businesses is that they can have activities in a country without being physically present. Take Google or Facebook or whatever company in the digital Rakuten, if we're in Japan, whatever company in the digital space, they may have profits in a country without being physically present. And that has triggered what we call the digital tax debate, because countries, in particular market economies, where the profit is made, because you have the consumers of the digital service or the buyers of digital goods, these countries say, we would like to tax the profits of these companies as we do tax the profits of other multinational companies. And the reason why they cannot tax these profits is that international tax rules, the way governments across the world interact with each other, international tax rules date back to the last century, the 1920s, and they provide for a country to tax a foreign company only when this foreign company has a permanent establishment, a physical presence, a fixed place of business on their territory. And we all understand that digital companies, because they have scale without mass, They can operate in a country without the need of a physical presence. And that's the tension we have currently in the international system. Do we change the rules, but we would need all the countries to allow the market jurisdictions to tax these activities? And after all, if you create a new nexus, a new right to tax without physical presence, you also need to change what we call the profit allocation rules. How much profit will you allocate to the market, which would not be limited to digital companies. So starting with the digital issue, you come up with a revision of the rules which go much beyond digital companies. So either you change the rules or you cannot change the rules, and then countries are frustrated. They're frustrated because the US or other countries don't want to change the rules, and therefore they cannot tax these companies because the tax treaties prevent them from doing so. And that's why a number of countries, France, for instance, but also Italy, the UK, Turkey, and other countries, have decided to try to tax digital through their own way. It cannot be on profit, so they go on transactions, and they introduce digital taxes, which are tolls, taxes on transactions of digital companies, of highly digitalized companies like Google, Facebook advertisement model, or the platforms like Airbnb or Uber. So they take, like the French, 3% on all transactions, which is no longer a tax on profit. So to make short this long answer, what is a digital tax? For the time being, these are the promises or threats of digital taxes on transactions from a number of countries, which are frustrated that we do not have yet a reform of international tax which would allow them to tax the profits of digital companies and other companies.
Well, thank you. Pascal, did you say the current international tax systems were constructed 100 years ago? Did I hear it correct?
Absolutely. The Model Tax Convention, the model on which the 3,500 bilateral treaties between countries are constructed, this model was originally drafted in 1928. Now, it's been changed since then, and the OECD's core business is to update the Model Tax Convention, but the frame has not changed. And what is challenged today is precisely this frame. It's probably time to think out of the box, out of the frame. And that's what we are trying to do with 137 members in the inclusive framework. And one of the members, guess what, is Singapore, represented by Huey.
Wow, okay. So I didn't hear it wrong. 100 years ago, we actually constructed this tax system with which we are still trying to run our economies. That must be a little bit of a challenge. So let's move on to Huey. I would like to ask you a question that's more relevant to perhaps our Asian audience. So Pascal described what this digital tax is all about. What does that really mean to you and me? We're in Asia, you're in Singapore. A lot of the audience today are probably based in Asia. What does that mean to our region? What does it mean to Singapore?
Yeah. Thank you, Yumiko. I should say that yes, indeed, digital service tax, as we have heard about, is really something that we have seen being proposed in a number of the EU member states. And more recently, we've heard the announcement from Canada. Essentially, as what Pascal mentioned, it is really about saying, me as a country, as a jurisdiction, I want to levy a tax. I want to collect a tax on another company that is selling into Singapore, even though it has no presence. So essentially, it is a domestic decision of a country whether they want to impose a tax like that. So in Asia, yes, it's equally for governments and for countries to decide whether they want a tax like that. We'll talk about the implications of such a tax later. So in our region, I should highlight that by and large, what most Asian countries have done is to deal with remote selling of services into a country by way of the consumption tax, which is, you tax, you levy a tax, but the incidence of the tax falls on the consumer. So this is to be distinguished from a digital service tax, as is commonly mentioned today, which is a tax on the gross revenue of the company that is selling the digital services. So that's a quick take. And I should also highlight. I mustn't let this opportunity pass since Pascal mentioned it. He said that in let's say if the country chooses to levy a digital service tax, I think he has framed it as there is profit in the market jurisdiction. And I should say that this is really indeed a fundamental point that is being debated and discussed. And it is a question of how do we, what is a fair basis of looking at the new international tax rules and how do we share the taxing rights?
Thank you. Thank you, both of you, to explain what we're talking about today, which obviously is impacting all of us in different ways, but in particular companies. Quite frankly, today, when you talk about business activities, pretty much everything has to do with digital activities in one way or another. So clearly, very important topic here. But we would also like to talk about the fact that this is not bilateral discussion. This is a very much global discussion that we are trying to promote here, which maybe, maybe that's a common sense today because we know that a lot of companies, a lot of countries are so interlinked today. But it wasn't the case 100 years ago, probably. I'm sure there are bilateral situations, but I would imagine situations were much simpler, I would imagine. And today it's a lot more complicated. So now, next question to you, both of you, is how do you go about in terms of making sure the discussion that you are promoting is global? In other words, how do you make sure different countries, depending on the state of economies, depending on the kind of a social framework that each country has, they have a very different sort of value systems and social systems. And yet, this has to be a global discussion. This cannot be bilateral, because that would be just too complicated. So the question to you, Pascal, first of all, is how do you make sure that all countries can participate in this global discussion to make sure that the framework that we're trying to come up with is going to be truly global? And what are the ways, as an OECD, you are actually trying to promote to make sure this is not going to be a discussion among a selected group of countries, perhaps developed economies? What are the things that you're seeing on that front, Pascal?
Thank you, Yumiko. This is quite simple. What we have established in tax over the past 10 years, because 10 years ago with the global financial crisis, there has been a change of governance, and international tax has become an important topic for the leaders of the G20. So instead of dealing with these issues just among the club of the developed countries, which is the OECD, Japan being one of the first members of the OECD, we have enlarged the discussion to all interested countries. It started 10 years ago with what we call the Global Forum on Transparency, the end of bank secrecy, where we today have 161 members on an equal footing in the body. And in 2012-2013, we launched a new layer of work, which was called BEPS, for base erosion and profit shifting. And that work was about trying to introduce some form of tax regulation for the taxation of multinational companies. And we have established an inclusive framework bringing all interested countries on an equal footing to implement the BEPS measures. There were 15 measures, but also to keep negotiating new standards. And when we're talking about fixing the digital challenges or the challenges of the digitalization of the economy, we're talking about establishing new standards, and that's the mandate of the inclusive framework. So this inclusive framework, which was created in Japan, in Kyoto, in 2016. This inclusive framework today includes 137 members, all OECD member countries, all G20 member countries, and all interested countries which want to participate to the discussion, which want to have a say in the discussion. Singapore is one of them. Singapore is, of course, an extremely important country in that game because it's an investment hub. So it's a country where you have a lot of investment which is made in Asia and in the rest of the world. And Singapore is also a player in the G20, but it's just one of the 137 members where the conversation is taking place.
So to Pascal's point, in terms of equal footing and the inclusive framework that we actually have been trying to promote, in reality, Huey, I want to ask you a question. In reality, does it really work when you are dealing with countries that are at the different stages of economic development? Especially in Asia, we see a country like Singapore, highly developed, but there are other countries in Asia which are not at the same stage of economic development. So when we talk about an inclusive framework and equal footing, in reality, is it really that easy? Aren't there issues and challenges because of different stages of economic development?
It's fair to say that in any multilateral discussions, the process will not be an easy one. That's realistic. However, in the case of an inclusive framework that is set up to deal with BEPS and how do we, what kind of new international tax rules are we going to formulate? The process, I think, is working as well as any multilateral forum can possibly be for a few reasons. Because one is a structure. The structure is such that there are two different levels at which the conversation takes place. One is a very technical level at which Singapore is quite well represented as well. And this is where we do a lot of heavy lifting in the technical discussions. And then there is another level, which is a steering group level, which is a more policy-oriented level, which, Pascal and his team has also taken care to assemble a group of jurisdictions with interests that are representative of the economic profile, and so discussions occur at the two different levels, and it is facilitated by the fact that OECD has a pretty strong institutional capacity in tax. Yeah.
Okay. So again, being very sort of candid, what are the hardest challenges? Pascal, when you get up in the morning, you go to work and you're like, oh, I got to deal with this again. As a head of tax office here at OECD, I'm sure there are a lot of headaches. But when it comes to digital tax, what are the most challenging situations that you would identify, from your seat, from your position in terms of promoting the digital tax debate?
There are many challenges. The first of them is you deal with sovereign countries. They are sovereign from a tax perspective. They are sovereign in the international framework, and therefore they may decide not to join. Now you have different countries. You have smaller countries, bigger countries, and you have countries like the US or China or Japan. And of course, as most of the multinational companies will be headquartered in a handful of countries, and in particular in the US. And as we know, the US has a quite peculiar relationship with the rest of the world, whatever the administration is. They have a quite unilateral vision of the world. It's not easy to get the US on board on the conversation, especially as given the divided government, which is organized by the Constitution of the US, where the executive branch cannot commit the legislative branch, unlike in many other countries where you have an alignment between executive and legislative. It's quite difficult to bring the US to be part of the solution, and they must be part of the solution, because without them, given that most of the multinational companies are American companies, it's very difficult. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is technical. You need to find the right technical answers, which should be balanced. There are a number of countries which are frustrated, they want to tax companies, but this must be done in a principled manner. If you don't follow principles, then you may quickly have something like chaos. And Huey is very good at reminding the inclusive framework that we need principled approaches. So that's another dimension of the challenge. Finally, and you mentioned that this, Yumiko, you have very different countries with very different interests. You have market jurisdictions, you have exporting countries, you have investment hubs, you have developing countries, and each of these countries will have a different view. What my job is to keep them together, and not only to talk, but also to walk together, to walk towards a solution. So it's a bit like herding cats. It's difficult, and sometimes you get scratched here and there. But what is at stake is keeping the international community together, keeping cooperation, which is the best way to offer multinational companies tax certainty, to offer a more secure tax environment together with fairness, so that the people, the woman and the man in the street, may not have the feeling that it's all the taxes are on them and not on multinational companies. So you need to find the right balance there. It's not easy, but the political stakes are very high, which gives us some confidence that countries will make the necessary efforts to keep that negotiation going on, and at some point to be concluded.
Okay, thank you. So, as Pascal said, at the end of the day, this issue comes down to individual country. You know, each country is independent, and each country has different, you know, value systems and social systems, and quite frankly, they may not be perfectly aligned on the international platform, but we kind of have to make sure there is going to be some framework with which, if not all, hopefully all, but most countries around the world can work together. So I would like to go to Huey just to talk about Singapore, just to talk about Singapore situation only, just for a moment, just because we've been talking about global elements for the last 20 minutes. So in the Singaporean context, again, we're talking about just your country. The digital tax reform, where are you now, and where do you see it's going? And what are the upside, you know, good things that can come with the digital tax reform that's going to take place, or that's taking place in Singapore? And what about the potential downside or challenges? I know it's a big question. I'm sorry to ask you a long question, but whatever you can share, your thought would be very interesting.
Yeah, let me try to sort of reframe. When say, digital tax reform, if I suppose that's against the context of what we see in Europe with the EU, some of the EU member states levying digital service tax. Now, in the case of Singapore, no, we are not implementing any of these unilateral measures in taxing digital services. What we have is a consumption tax, or GST, on digital services, which is common across the world, in Europe as well as in Asia. So this conversation that is going on internationally on rewriting the international tax rules, and you know, this, at the end of the day, as Pascal said, this is about the sharing of taxing rights, and so what are we guided by? In our view, the conversation or the dialogue should be guided or should be geared with a view to a new set of rules that will continue to encourage or support economic dynamism and growth, right? We think that the dialogue ought not result in a situation where countries are sacrificing growth for revenue, for tax revenue. We should be, if we come to a consensus, we hope to see a set of rules that will continue to reward companies for the functions they have undertaken and for the risk that they have undertaken and for the innovation that they have undertaken. So in the next few months, the discussions will be important and will continue to engage in the multilateral forum, and we are committed to the ongoing discussions. You will see from the documents that's published in the public domain now that that there is a sort of a conceptual basis for taxing digital services, and in any case, the conversation has also shifted beyond just taxing digital services. But in any case, the conceptual basis is really about how you tax a company that doesn't have a presence in the market, and the consensus, or we're moving towards the consensus as regarding that there is a so-called nexus to tax when that company that's selling remotely into the market has an active or significant or sustained engagement with the market. So this is a very important point, because we don't want the new international tax to be one where it allows a market country to be taxing the revenue or even the income just purely on the basis of mere sales. When there is no active, significant engagement with the market, there ought not to be any taxing right per se. So that really is quite important from the design perspective, because we are really talking about taxing the income of companies, and it has to be distinguished from a consumption tax system where the bigger the market, the larger the consumption, the higher the amount of tax, because, well, that's a consumption tax, and that should be left to the job of VAT or GST. But in the case of the new international tax rules on digital service tax, we should be thinking about it in terms of taxing on a net basis on the income, and to be able to give recognition for current year losses and for past year losses. It is important from the company's perspective if we are going to ensure that the new tax rules continue to promote economic growth and innovation.
Thank you. I mean, it's so true that now we've been working remotely. By the way, OECD, we've been working remotely for the last how many months? I don't know. It's something like almost 10 months or so. Looks as if it's going to be the case for a little longer, and I'm sure it's the same with many other countries. Japan is a little bit more relaxed, but still. And I think this really goes to show you how quickly our economy is being digitized. It's been going on for a while, but I think the coronavirus crisis really has put a lot more pressure in terms of how quickly we transform ourselves, not only just the day-to-day activities, but in business models. And I think the digital taxation, digital tax discussion really needs to pick up a lot of momentum and speed, because as we're doing this, we're doing digital. Three of us are just doing this from three different locations, which is now the reality. So I think the reality check number one, it is this is the world we live in, and the coronavirus really kind of pushed this new reality at a much faster pace in terms of how quickly it's moving. So I want to actually touch upon the innovation side of discussion, because this is part of the panel discussion. We've been talking a lot about the rule making from a regulatory perspective, perhaps for global community here. But what do you think is the impact in terms of the digital global digital tax scheme might have on the general, I would say, culture to promote innovation and new companies in particular? Pascal, do you have any thought that you could potentially share on this question?
Yeah, it's not an easy question, actually. Huey rightfully said that we shouldn't sacrifice growth for revenue. And that's the OECD recommendation for countries facing the wall of debt. Debt will increase massively because governments had to pay for people to stay at home during the COVID crisis. And the recommendation, the economic recommendation by the OECD is don't rush to fiscal consolidation, don't try to collect taxes now to consolidate, rather promote growth. However, at the same time, we can see that growth now is also threatened by the lack of trust of people in globalization. You can see a backlash. You have had growth, globalization, but in many countries at the cost of jobs, at the cost of the standard of living. And that's what you can see in European countries, but look, in the US as well. You have a backlash against globalization. And one way of limiting that backlash is to have what people would call a fairer tax system, which means, from an international perspective, a better allocation of taxing rights. So you need to be careful that you design a system which will support growth on the one hand, but which will not face a backlash on the other hand. And this is what we are trying to do by building more tax cooperation for countries to better implement their own sovereignty. Singapore has its own tax system, and it fits Singapore's social needs. France has a completely different system, or so has Japan. What is important is that each sovereignty can implement its own set of legislation on tax, which is designed to fund its social model. And what we have seen over the past 20 years is that globalization, or 30 years, globalization has undermined the real sovereignty of countries. And this is what we are trying to restore with some form of tax cooperation. If we don't do it, the risk we face is that countries will take unilateral measures. They will protect their sovereignty in an aggressive manner instead of a coordinated manner. And I think this is the challenge. What is the trade-off between supporting growth, and Huey is absolutely right, but at the same time, supporting long-term growth by making sure that countries don't close themselves down against globalization, which would be no longer sustainable. And that's where the situations are very different between Singapore, Germany, developing countries, the US, and a few other countries. And that's one of the challenges we are facing in the inclusive framework at the OECD.
The question of trust. Very heavy, very important. I would love to just pick your brain in terms of how you think about this question of trust, especially from the regulatory perspective. As you said, balance between growth and also the needs for regulations. And there has to be this question of trust. You have to have a trust, from the business community, from industries. They need to be able to say, yes, this is a fair system, we can live with it and grow business at the same time. Do you have any thought in terms of what you hear, from your counterparts from the business world in terms of what they want to see in you when it comes to trust?
Yeah. I think first of all, we agree that for the solution, for the consensus solution for the long term to work, it has to be sustainable, has to consider fair, equitable sharing of taxing rights between countries, and also consider the perspectives of the businesses. The current situation is far from desirable, because in a landscape where different countries choose to implement their own form of a digital services tax, it make for a very fragmented landscape that makes it difficult for businesses, because each country will have their own form of a way of defining what's taxable and what's not. So it's extremely complicated. It can result in overtaxation and a lot of tax uncertainty. Hence, I think the promising direction we're seeing are countries willing to come together to forge a new consensus. So that is a first step towards building trust, and we are very committed to the process of coming to eventual consensus solution. So that's important. And second, when it comes to the sharing of taxing rights, yes, different countries will have different policies, and on the one hand, there's a revenue needs. On the other hand, we must always remember that we should be guided by the direction that the environment should continue to support growth and enterprise. And to our mind, in our view, in a fair and equitable system, will be one where, yes, if there is a global consensus to allocate more taxing rights to the markets, it should remain that the location, the jurisdiction, or the country that hosts the company will continue to enjoy the majority of the profits, or the taxing rights to the majority of the profits, because after all, it is that host country that provides the institutions and institutional support, the environment, and the infrastructure for the company. And of course, the company where substantive activities are, that would be the place where the majority of the profit should continue to reside. So to our mind, we should be thinking of growing the pie and coming to a system where there is where it recognizes what digitalization has done to all our economies, and for this to be sustainable, the views of the perspectives of the businesses are important, and businesses ought to be also looking at contributing to the consultation that is ongoing right now. But top on our mind in this whole process is also about a future system that considers giving fostering an environment where businesses can have early certainty. So, where businesses have clear, transparent mechanisms where they can have clarity, early certainty on what the tax treatment might be. That helps to create trust between the businesses and the governments as well, and trust in the process. And second, important for businesses, which is critical as well, is that there must be an effective dispute resolution system. Again, this must be a transparent process that businesses can avail themselves of. So again, this the infrastructure for creating such a mechanism will also be something that engender trust. But supporting all this, underlying all this, if the new rules come to pass, and we are still completely engaged in the conversation, is that we also believe that there must be a consistent application of the rules across different countries, because once the new rules are being knocked out and countries agree to the new rules, they must abide by the new rules, and we can oblige countries to commit to the new rules by way of a multilateral mechanism. Again, so this is agree to be bound by a common set of rules and agreement to implement them consistently. It will also help engender trust in the entire ecosystem.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm afraid we are running out of time. So I just wanted to finish with my last question. Actually, this one is for Pascal. Can you just tell us what we can expect in terms of what is likely to happen to the agreement, the timeline? What does 2021, what is it going to bring to you or to us?
Well, first, we have to recognize that the deadline was by the end of 2020. We have 3 weeks left, and we will not deliver a consensus-based solution by the end of the year. However, the inclusive framework, when it met in October, virtually, agreed that we had done a good job, that we had a solid basis, and the work we do is in 2 pillars. So we have blueprints for each pillar, and the inclusive framework, but also the G20 recognize that this is a solid basis for a future agreement. And we have reset the calendar, and we have a new deadline, which is mid-21. So we have to deliver a solution by mid-21. Our countries will do what Huey has described, unilateral measures. Now, the big question mark is, what will be the position of the new US administration? We don't know yet. They're not yet in office. We'll know as soon as they are appointed, as soon as they can take decision. What we know is that this is now a political issue. It's been escalated to the level of finance ministers, of leaders. I think President-elect Biden will hear from President Macron, Chancellor Merkel, or other leaders in the world that there must be a solution. So we need to wait and see what the US position will be, because it's quite important in that conversation. All the other countries in the world, I think, being in the mindset of let's reach a deal. So we'll see in the coming weeks. Immediately, what we have, women referred to it, is a public consultation closing down next week on the 14th of December. So we invite all businesses, all stakeholders, NGOs to comment on this. We will debrief the comments in January so that we can fine-tune the blueprints, resume the negotiation, and hopefully reach an agreement by mid-21.
Well, thank you. I think 2021 is going to be an interesting year, to say the least. I think that means next year when we have this FinTech Festival, we're going to have you back and really discuss what has happened in 2021. So with that, thank you so much for your time and really interesting discussion. I hope the audience has learned a few things, and hopefully we will continue this very important discussion with all the stakeholders around the world, but in particular in Asia. Again, thank you so much.